think we've got enough chairs now, is that right, Chair? Thank you. Sorry? You can, I'm sorry. Everybody should have a leaflet. If you haven't got one, there's some spares here. Right, first of all, this is going to be a short talk because actually we don't know very much about St Edmund. So, I'll try and find a few interesting tidbits, but it's not going to be very long. It's part of a series that we started before last Christmas about the saints in the windows, and you will now know that we have a new shiny guide, kindly done by Elizabeth, which tells you a bit more about them if you can't wait till the next set of talks. But this is the third one about that window in the chancel, and we've had before St Oswald and St Hilda. Norman did St Hilda, and they're on the YouTube channel, so if you want to catch up on that window, that's where they are. And then we're moving on to one of the windows in the nave later on with Jack and with Elizabeth in the next two talks. But St Edmund is finishing off, and you'll see in the first slide, I'm not showing the slides because of copyright reasons, because if they go on YouTube we get lots of letters saying you owe us all this money for copying your pictures, so apologies that you've got them here. But that's the window in the top one, and St Edmund is the king on the right. So on the left is St Oswald, that we've had already. In the middle is St Hilda of Whitby, who we've had already. And they were roughly in the sort of 7th century. So we're now skipping on to the 9th century. So we're still in Anglo-Saxon England, but we're skipping on to St Edmund, who lived from 841 to 869, more or less. And just to say, sometimes he's known as St Edmund Martyr, sometimes St Edmund King and Martyr, sometimes he's known as St Edmund King, Virgin and Martyr, but I'm not sure that we know about the Virgin bit. So far as we know, he didn't have a wife and offspring, but then all the records for East Anglia were destroyed by the Vikings, so we don't know that he didn't either. So, but it is said that his flag is 3 crowns, 3 yellow crowns on a blue background, and it is said that one is for king, one is for martyr, and one is for virgin. But I'm not going to enlarge on that bit. Right, well, what was special about Edmund? He was king of East Anglia between 855 and 869. He was only 14 when he became king. He was probably following on his father, but we don't know. And there's some ridiculous story, and it is ridiculous because the dates are all wrong, about Offa plucking him out of a town in Germany. But that really won't hold, I think. He was martyr to the heathen Danes. Danes also sometimes known as Vikings, because some of them are actually Norwegian. So we'll come to that in a minute. He was regarded as a English patron saint, in fact almost as the English patron saint, from about 920 till at least 1100 or so, and actually more or less until the Reformation, although George obviously came in, as did Edward the Confessor, as competitors later. And he was the subject of a medieval cult, so there's lots of stories about St Edmund. So a lot of what we know is actually rather mythical, likely to be mythical. And what we actually know, as I say, is very little, because all the records were destroyed. And the exciting thing is that there's a big campaign for looking for his bones, his relics at the moment. So you may hear more of St Edmund in the days to come. The next slide is about what England was like in the 9th century. And if you go back to the previous talk about Oswald, there was a lot of movement at that time of different groups, lots of battles, the boundaries of the areas within England, both the traditional British areas, which are to the west, or the English areas, which were settled by the Angles and the Saxons and the Jutes. So in the 7th century, these boundaries had been very flexible. But when it came to the 9th century, it was all pretty settled, and we have the different kingdoms. It's called the Heptarchy. There are 7 kingdoms of England, And there's also the green, the dark green bits are where there's still the old British. It's very difficult to get mixed up between the British and the English, the British being the original people there. John is saying the British were Christians, but they still kept their sort of Roman-type Christianity. And there were lots of strange saints, John, from Cornwall and Wales and so on. So they had a particular brand of Christianity, but the whole of the Saxon areas were solidly Christian and under the Roman Catholic Church at that point, after the Synod of Whitby, for which look at Norman's talk. The other map is of East Anglia at the time, more or less at the time, and you'll see that most of the settlements, the little black dots, are around the coast. So we're at a time where most of the movement is around the coast, and it was a very big trading area. There's a place, bottom right, called Gipswich, which is now Ipswich, which was one of the biggest towns in the country and had a lot of trade going on with Europe. And you'll see that the fens are still very wet and fairly impassable, although Ely is still in the middle on that island. So it was a kind of area that seems to be kind of quite cut off from the rest of England to some extent because of getting around the Fenland area. And then there was also Devil's Dyke to keep some of the enemies out. So that's where we were at when Edmund came along as King of East Anglia. The other thing that has been happening is that the Vikings, say that they're interchangeably Vikings and Danes, but I'll try and remember to call them Vikings, had already sacked Lindisfarne in 790 and were beginning to raid the coasts and realising that the monasteries, of which there were a number by then, had a lot of wealth. So it started off as sort of one-off raids, and then gradually they were coming to realise that these were good lands to settle. And so more and more they were coming and overwintering in the UK, in England, and beginning to put down roots. At the beginning, fairly near, when Edmund became king at the beginning, as well as the raids on the northeast coast of England, they finally landed a very big force of Vikings in East Anglia and overwintered there. And it's believed that Edmund probably did a deal with them in order to let them stay as long as they pushed on. They seemed to be aiming to join with the northern group. And so he was forced to give them horses and to provide food while they camped in East Anglia. And then they moved on, and that was the point at which they took York. And you know that York is the big Viking city, Jorvik. So that it seems that they were aiming to take York. And then they moved down to Nottingham. This took years. This was called the Great Heathen Army. They'd amassed this large army combined with the raiders from the north and those from East Anglia, and they were moving downwards, and they finally landed at Thetford to spend the winter. Now it appears that at that point they sacked the monastery at Peterborough, and at that point Edmund started getting worried that they were going to sack his monasteries and actually invade. So it appears that it wasn't the Great Heathen Army that challenged Edmund. It was more likely to be Edmund that challenged the great army that were camped at Thetford. I have to say, a lot of my information comes from a splendid book. Well, some of it comes from Wikipedia, which I have to say is wonderful as ever. That's there. But it also, I'm grateful to Chris Ward, who dug out a book, actually a very modern book, called Edmund in Search of England's Lost King, which is really helpful and sort of tries to distinguish the fact from the fiction. So that's really, really good. Anyway, whatever, there was a Battle of Thetford, and it is fairly clear that Edmund didn't survive it. Now, whether he led the army from East Anglia in, or whether he remained outside the battle, or whether he was killed after the battle, is not clear. All the Anglo-Saxon chronicles tell us was that he died during that battle. So because people were reckoned in England, not in anywhere else, to be martyrs if they were fighting a battle against the pagans. Then he immediately became a martyr. This was apparently not true on the continent, but it was true in England. And Oswald, for example, was reckoned to be a martyr because he was fighting against Penda from Mercia. And so was a guy called Sigebert, who is a rather lost saint, but seems to have been rather a fine man, who was in East Anglia a couple of generations before Edmund. So he was also a martyr to fighting the pagans in England. So now they grew up. I mean, so far as we know, he might just have perished in battle. And it's thought that his body was then buried in a place that we don't quite know where it is, but it seems to be that the odds now are from being at... Now, how do you pronounce it? Hoxton. Hoxton. I didn't know how to pronounce it.
Hoxana.
Right, okay, fine. Well, it was thought it was at Hoxton, and there's a big memorial there, but it's now thought likely to be at a place called Bradfield St Clair, which is about 6 miles north of Bury St Edmunds, and of course Bury St Edmunds is the clue. So his body was buried there. There was a church temporarily erected over it, and then finally it was brought somewhat later into the abbey. There was an existing abbey at a place you'll find on the map called Beodrixworth, just above the word South Folk, which is of course Suffolk these days. But Beodrixworth is now Bury St Edmunds, so there was already an abbey there. And of course when they had the relics of the saint, it then became a much bigger, a huge church. In fact, one of the biggest churches in Europe was later erected on it. So that's the basis of what we know. There's another story later about the bones, but I'll come on to that a bit about the relics. Now, the martyrdom of Edmund was written about by a French monk about 80 or 90 years after Edmund died. And by this time, we have all sorts of myths arising. And then you'll see the picture on the right-hand side. It was suggested, well, just before this, it was suggested that maybe he wasn't just killed in battle, that maybe he'd been offered to stay as King of East Anglia, but under the rule of the Vikings, and therefore he would have to give up Christianity and swear obeisance to the Norse gods. So it was said that maybe he refused to do this, and at that point they strung him, they attached him to a tree and used him for target practice. And that's where, now you'll see what was in his hand on the chancel window. Anybody see? Arrows, and the other thing on the left-hand side is a sceptre. So the sceptre for king, the arrows for martyr. So we're back to king and martyr. So it was, the story was that they fired arrows, and he then ended up looking a bit like St Sebastian. So a lot of the pictures have arrows sticking out all over the place, but there's no actual evidence that this happened. It was said that he didn't die after they'd fired out all these arrows, so just to make sure, they beheaded him. This is also part of the story. And they buried the head. You can see in the bottom, the top bit of the picture, the head is falling off. And at the bottom, the Viking is burying his head in the forest. The story gets even more weird because apparently when people started looking for the head then spoke and said, "I'm here." It gets stranger and stranger. Also, it was said to be in the clutches of a wolf. But this may be part of the fact that the family he came from is likely to be called the Woofings, who were the kings of East Anglia at the time, and you will recognise, possibly those of you who are like me, passionate about Wagner, about it comes from the Wolflings and so on. So it also relates to Remus, Romulus and Remus, about being brought up by. So there were stories in the Roman Empire and since, and in the Norse myths about being brought up by a wolf. So maybe this is to do with that. Who knows? Anyway, so that was the story, and so after that he he was made a saint. It's thought that, I mean, you didn't need the permission of the Pope and so on in those days, but you had to be buried above ground in a shrine. So it was thought that at that stage, about 925, his body was dug up from the forest, brought to Bury St Edmunds and put in a shrine. And you'll see on the bottom left-hand picture with Henry VI, which might also be John Lydgate, but never mind. It was the occasion of Henry VI's visit. That the shrine of St Edmunds was rather magnificent in Bury St Edmunds, and that this was a site of pilgrimage and much visited. He, for one reason or another, was regarded then as a sort of patron saint of England, and it's thought that he had over Oswald the fact that he was pure. Oh, I should say, sorry, I missed out a bit. When he was dug up and put in, then his body was said to be incorrupt. And you may remember that this first happened to St Cuthbert when he was dug up and transferred to Durham Cathedral, that they found his body had not degenerated, not decayed, but was just fresh as if he'd just died. It's said that the same was true of St Edmund, and indeed of a number of his female relatives, one of whom was St Etheldreda, who was Abbess of Ely a bit earlier. So it's possible that if you want to be sceptical about incorruptibility, that they had learned how to embalm bodies like the Egyptians did for mummies, and that there were a number of members of his royal family that were indeed embalmed. But I mean, who knows? We don't know really. So he had over Oswald that he was incorrupt. He was, like Oswald, a king and a martyr. He had over St Cuthbert the fact he was a martyr. St Cuthbert died in his bed, as far as we know. So he seemed to have all the things that you needed to be the sort of main saint of England, which he became. And there was, say, lots of pilgrimage to the shrine at Bury St Edmunds. He continued to be considered at least one of the patron saints, and you'll see the picture on the right is of the Wilton diptych. It's not a very good reproduction, I'm afraid. If you know it, it's in the National Gallery, and it is the most fantastic bit of art. If you haven't seen it, it's wonderful. It has, as a diptych, it has two bits. The other bit has, this is Richard II being introduced to Mary and Jesus on the other side with the angels, but this is just the left-hand side. Richard II was not one of our more distinguished kings, but he was apparently very spiritual. And we have on the left-hand side, you can see it's given away by the arrow, we have St Edmund. He regarded St Edmund as his patron saint. We also have Edward the Confessor in the middle, and we have John Baptist on the right-hand side. So those were evidence that Edmund continued to be regarded as a patron saint well into sort of early medieval times, and even Henry VI, who came before in the Wars of the Roses, he spent a month at Bury St Edmunds with the shrine of St Edmund. So, you know, he continues along the story as being a patron saint, although St George, I now know, was introduced by Richard the Lionheart because he was on his way to the Crusades, wanted to win a battle, happened to be in a church dedicated to St George, prayed to St George, and he won the battle. So that's why we are saddled with St George. You can blame Richard the Lionheart, but he's nothing very much to do with the history of England, as you know. So St George gradually took over, but Edmund was still around until the Reformation. And at the Reformation, of course, the monasteries were sacked, and in particular, the monastery at the Abbey and the monastery at Bury St Edmunds was sacked. And there's a rather nice bit quoted in here. I was just going to apparently they sacked the monastery, the commissioners from Henry VIII's man, you know, Thomas Cromwell's commissioners sacked the monastery, but they left the shrine for a while, and then they came back in 1538, 1535. They noted the shrine, but they felt it was too big a job to dismantle it. So in 1538 they went back, but they complained that it was hard work to destroy the shrine. And there's a quotation from the commissioners which says, "We've been at St Edmund's Bury, where we found a rich shrine which was very cumbrous to deface. We have taken in the said monastery in gold and silver 5,000 marks and above. Over and besides a well and rich cross with emeralds, or also divers and sundry stones of great value." So they did pull down the shrine and obviously pulled off all the sacred bits. And it is not known exactly what happened to the bones. The bones were removed apparently before they came to dismantle the shrine. But it was the case that rather earlier, when Louis VIII of France had entered England to try and, after King John and so on, he was said to have been given the bones, which he transferred via Paris to Toulouse. So there was a monastery in Toulouse that reckoned it had the bones of St Edmund. They wanted them because there was a pandemic on, and they wanted them to fend off the pandemic. So you'll be glad to know that St Edmund is also the saint of pandemics, which might be very useful. So it was thought that the bones were therefore resident in Toulouse, and they finally, the monks there offered them back. And it was just in time, this was in the 19th century, and it was just in time for Westminster Cathedral, the Roman Catholic Cathedral, was then being built in 1901. And the aim was to have St Edmund's relics on the altar, in the altar at Westminster Cathedral. But the Archbishop was tipped off that actually there might be something dodgy about these bones, so not to touch them. Apparently in the 19th century they had been authenticated, but he was warned off by a couple of people, and it is said that when they opened the bones they found a kind of mixed set of bones including male and female. So it seems now that those were not the relics of St Edmund at all, but where the monks at Toulouse, I mean, they probably believed that they basically had them. So that sort of started up the thing that if he's not in Toulouse, then where is he? And the latest thought was that maybe they were in a hurry to take the bones out of the sanctuary in the Reformation, and they might just have buried them in the monks' graveyard next door to the abbey. The monks' graveyard is currently underneath a tennis court. So apparently there is a big campaign, like Richard III being under the car park, to dig up the tennis court in the public park and try and find the actual bones of St Edmund. But who knows? So watch this space. There's also a campaign to have him back as the patron saint of England, but you know, good luck with that really. I mean, trying to dislodge the St George's cross from the flags is going to be pretty difficult. After the Reformation, just to finish the story, he was kind of removed from the list of saints for the Church of England, but he popped back in about 17-something. Somebody obviously was prepared to sponsor him. So he is now a recognised saint again of the Church of England, but rather a minor one. So we do celebrate his day, his festival, as a lesser feast day on November the 20th. So we've just actually had it. And I think that's just about all I can find out about Edmund. I haven't read all of that book, and I would like to finish it, Chris, if I can hang on to it. I also used this one about the origins. This is also a modern book about the Anglo-Saxons, which has a little bit, but not very much on it, but it's good on the background. And as I say, there's Wikipedia is excellent. So, okay, if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer. Try, Elizabeth.
It's not a question, but I suspect that one reason that St Edmund remained more prominent as the patron saint of England for quite a long time is because in the early Middle Ages, certainly, East Anglia was practically the centre of English civilization. I mean, that's where we received English comes from via Chaucer in East Anglia. And so so the influence of those who are supporting the East Anglian saint would be quite powerful.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Yes, I think you're very likely. They have apparently won the first task, which is now patron saint of Suffolk. This only happened about a couple of years ago.
Well,
so he's on his way. But yes, I think you're right. East Anglia was very wealthy, wasn't it? And therefore was, yes.
Tennis court is a bit more upmarket than a car park.
But apparently harder to dig up because people are less willing to sacrifice their tennis courts than a car park. Okay, I think that's
if it was the monk's graveyard, how on earth are they going to tell which bones are...
Oh, that may be where the DNA comes in, but I think it's questionable because actually there was nobody, since he was a virgin, you know, presumably, or not, we don't know who followed him. So it would be very difficult, I think, even to use DNA testing to know. So yes, you're quite right. Unless there's something, you know, marked or it's distinguished in some way, it would be really hard to know.
Well, one would have thought, if the monks did bury him, that they would have provided some kind of written record of who was in that particular grave.
Yes, I think there just aren't any, you know, nobody's found anything, so I don't know.
But, you know, we still don't know where King Alfred is buried.
Well, no, that's true.
Where the actual grave is.
I should say, by the way, that Alfred was the next generation. I mean, Alfred went on fighting the Danes, so it was, he was the same generation, really, but a bit younger. So he took over the battle, of course, against the Vikings, stroke Danes. Norma, sorry.
I think the name Edmund's also seen on the coronation stone in Kingston. Is that the same?
Oh, right. I didn't know that. That's really interesting. Right. Thank you. That's really helpful.
It was probably the name that was used by Saxon kings because of the reverence it had. So
yes, there were two. I didn't say that, but there were two Saxon kings. There was Edmund Ironside and Edmund II who used that name. And although there are no kings post the William the Conqueror, there were a number of princes who might have become kings who have the name Edmund, so it still persisted. And I mean, he was very popular, I think, in the Roman Catholic Church in the 19th century particularly, and to some extent today. I mean, there are numerous St Edmund's colleges or St Edmund's schools around. So, you know, I think
but he's not, I don't think he's the same family as the Saxon kings.
No, he's not. No, he's Anglian. He's definitely Anglian and related possibly to the Sutton.
So I doubt if it's the same.
So it won't be, no, he's not related to Alfred at all. No, that's right. So, well, we'll find out, yes. But, okay. All right, thank you very much. Next meeting.